So welcome to this second in a series of lectures on metaphysicals. The first one we had last month was on heaven and hell. Some of you may have attended that one, and today we're doing angels and demons. And next month, join us for magic and miracles, which will also include other things like curses, hexes, exorcism, all the things that involve divine action. Now, today, our goal is to look especially at Satan, because the character is so powerful and meaningful in the mental life of Christianity. To start with, I am a third-generation Christian, born in Malaysia, and I spent my formative study years in London and eventually here in New York City, where I've been here for about almost 31 years now. And I've got to say, I've been a Christian for that long, for over 40 years. I've never actually had a technical study of angels and demons. So this is new to me too, and I love it. I've been planning to do this for about, I think, 10 years now. So for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been delving into the number of technical books on this, and it's surprising how few there are. I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, I do not know of a single divinity school or seminary around the world that has a technical course on angels and demons. So this is a first timer for a lot of people, for me as well. And if you, like me, have been exposed to Christianity or Islam or Judaism for some years, you'll notice that the idea of angel at some level is part of the vocabulary. But if you, like me, are also one of those who have never really sat down and said, what does that mean when I say the angels did, or the devil made me do it? Or sometimes we say things like, I really wanted this to happen, but Satan stopped it. These are vocabularies we use quite casually, and very often, some of the people who are not Christians take us to task and say, what do you mean by that? Let's come clean with this, and let's decide what is it that we mean when we say angels and demons. Angels are basically messengers. It's found in all 3 Abrahamic religions, where they are in Greek is angelos, and we'll see later on towards the bottom of your screen in the infographic. In Hebrew is malak, and in Arabic is malaika. With various tiny changes, the characters are the same. The 7 archangels are the same at the bottom. But let's start with the Bible itself. So if you look at the first paragraph above the word Bible, we talk about angels being messengers. They are immortal, but they're not eternal. Now, what does that mean? It means they have not always been around. There was a time when they didn't exist. Only God exists, and they were created by God. So they're not eternal, but they're immortal, meaning they will not die a normal death. I say normal because it's possible for them to be annihilated. It's possible for angels to die, according to the Bible and the post-biblical traditions. He is normally seen as an opposer or an enemy, but in the early stages in the Hebrew Bible, he's not seen as a bad person. He was a celestial functionary appointed by God to govern the world. Now, this sounds very strange to most of us in the Christian world, because we think of Satan or the devil as something that's not supposed to be here, and he was just sent here. But in fact, according to the Bible, he was created for a purpose. And one of them, surprisingly, was to govern the world. In time, he defied God and was cast down from heaven to earth. So this was another teaching that came up. And Satan became the leader of other fallen angels. And these fallen angels became known as demons. So technically, what is Satan? Satan is the name of a person who led the fallen angels, called demons. And then eventually, in the narrative we have today, Jesus predicted that his rule will come to an end soon. Now, the Bible itself, written approximately from 500 BC to 100 AD, a 600-year period. At this stage, I want to pause just a second to clarify for some people who are asking. I know that King David lived about 1,000 years before Christ. There was no Bible in his time. What about people like Moses, almost 1,500 years before the time of Jesus? Was there no Bible in his time? What about Abraham, almost 2,000 years before Jesus? Was there no Bible in his time? Well, for the Christian world, the Bible includes the New Testament. So this says no, there was no Bible in his time. Even the Old Testament, as a written text, did not come about until about 500 BC. So we ask the question, why? What happened in that period that made it so interesting that it came about in that period? It's not for today's topic, but 500 BC or thereabouts, in its amazing time in world history. It's called the axial age, or the center of the axial age. Okay, axis of the wheel. It's when all the major world religions started emerging in written form. So we have the Greek scholars. In China, we've got Lao Tzu and Master Mo, as well as Confucius, all writing spiritual insights. And in India as well, we've got Vedanta. So in all these places in the world, as well as in Zoroastrianism in Persia, it emerged around the same time. No one knows exactly why. With all kinds of theories, some people believe that the human brain had evolved to the point where it became sensitive to spiritual wisdom, and that's why most of the world's great religions emerged around this time. But let's go. There are 5 panels in front of you on the Bible. Let's go to the first one: Hebrew Old Testament and Apocryphal. We call it Hebrew Old Testament because there's also a Greek Old Testament, and the reason we have 2 is because of a single person called Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. This young man came from Macedonia, went on to conquer much of what we now know as Eurasia, all the way from Greece down to Egypt and eastward all the way to what then was known as the land of the Hindus, or India, but today we know it as Pakistan. He nearly made it to China. He wanted to go all the way to conquer because he felt that the gods gave him a mandate to conquer the world. Now, as it turned out, he didn't do that, and he died in Babylonia at the age of 30. But his successors eventually broke up his kingdoms into 4 major kingdoms, and the ones that were involved in the biblical lands of Egypt and Lebanon and Israel and Jordan, they promoted what we now call Hellenism, which is about the idea of Greek thought and Greek thinking. So even though Alexander himself was not a Greek, he was a Macedonian, his fascination with the Greek world brought the Greek Old Testament into being. So that by about 200 BC, the Greek Old Testament. The Greek Old Testament was written out. We call it the LXX. So back and forth between the Hebrew and the Greek Old Testament, you will see a development of titles and names. In the Hebrew Old Testament, there are 2 characters that we normally think of as Satan. One is Satan with a capital S, which is a person. Then we have Hasatan, normally called the Satan, but that's not a name. That's an office. It's like a presidency, right? So we have president, the presidency, and then we've got the person called President Biden here in America. In any case, there are other characters mentioned in the Old Testament that refers to angels and demons. So we have the angel of Yahweh, or angel of the Lord, we sometimes call it, the one who smote the Assyrians who were attacking Israel. We have got the angelic patrollers who patrol around the world, going around. At this stage, I would ask you to suspend your sense of scientific reality and think about in the days where people use all kinds of metaphors to explain natural events, for example, how the clouds move. And you'll find in old maps, in the 16th century maps, you've got clouds with faces of humans blowing the air, because they didn't know that wind was not caused by something blowing. It is caused by the motion of the earth, and the relative motion of the earth causes relative changes in pressure, and that's where we get wind. But they didn't know that. We have got the watchers in Genesis chapter 6 as well. And the watchers are interesting because that character of the watchers were also used in the movie where Russell Crowe played Noah's Ark, if you recall. The watchers were the spirits that eventually mated with human women, and they gave birth to the Anakim. We've got the lying spirit, we've got the troubling spirit. So these are all interesting characters in the Old Testament that it's right for us to sit down and say, okay, let's sit down and what are these spirits all over the place in the Old Testament? Interestingly, David himself was also referred to as a Satan, partly because the word Satan then for David is used as an enemy. Someone can betray us. What happened was King David was appointed to be king. King Saul, the existing king, didn't like it. They went to war. The Philistines were having a war with King Saul, and David was invited to join the Philistines to fight. Some of the other generals were very concerned, and they say, how can we trust David? What if he becomes unto us a Hasatan, which means what if he becomes unto us a betrayer of our goal? And that's what he meant by Satan. So the word Satan in the New Testament doesn't always mean the same thing. You can look at the context, look at the actual words. By the time of the Greek Old Testament, in the books of Job and Jeremiah and Zechariah, we find that the Ha-Satan in Hebrew became Ho-Diabolos in Greek, the devils. So here's the first time we have the idea of the devil. From that transition, we know the devil is referring to Satan. It's the same person. And later on, you'll see there are other words that are very important for those of us who are studying the role of angels in literature and art and music. By the time we get to the Greek New Testament, which is the time of Jesus, the time of the apostles, we'll find that Satan or devil has been used interchangeably, and he's put in charge of the kingdoms of the world. We know this, for example, in the case of one of the three temptations of Jesus. The devil brought him up to the highest mountain to see all the kingdoms of the world, and the devil had the opportunity to say, if you bow down to me, I will grant you these kingdoms. If you read carefully, as a Christian or even as someone who is interested in religious literature, it seems strange that God would allow the devil to have that kind of power. But there we go. And Jesus acknowledged it. Jesus knows that he's kind of power. Jesus could have said, you don't have that kind of power. You're not in charge. But in fact, Jesus responded as if the devil had that kind of power. The devil's main function is to test the virtue of mankind. He's been doing this from the Old Testament times. In the book of Job, for example, surprisingly, you find the devil walking about in the counsel of God. And God didn't say, what are you doing here? God said to Satan at the time, tell me what have you been doing and walking around the earth? Because that's what his job was. And that's when we have the idea of Job being the pawn, we must, between a discussion between Satan and God. You know the story. Satan is telling God, your servant Job, well, he's obedient only because things are good for him. But what if you take away all the other bits? Now, the only thing that Satan could not do was he could not kill Job. He could do anything he wanted to test him, but not do that. Later on in the New Testament, Satan also tested Jesus and his disciples. And what can he do, apparently, even after the New Testament times? He can send parasitic demons. So we find the demons in the Gospels where they will take over either humans or in one time, the pigs, where Legion was taken over. Legion refers to 10,000. And then we have the unclean spirits. So these are all the concepts that was emerging in the Bible at the time of the New Testament. By the time of the Greek New Testament, later what we call Pauline writings, Satan becomes an impeder of Christianity, punisher of wrongdoing, and the means to rehabilitate wrongdoers. This is interesting for me as well, that God will use Satan to get people to turn to God. And finally, in the fifth panel, we have Satan as the angel of death, the devil as lion, and the devil as coward. So now this concludes the first panel. And you can read for yourself at the bottom, the angels of the Holy Bible and the angels of the Quran. Okay? We're going to pause here to take any questions of clarity before we move to the second panel. Does anyone have any questions of clarity?
You know, Ron, I have a question. You mentioned Satan's kind of role changing in the New Testament. Doesn't Isaiah also refer to Lucifer as being thrown down and being put, or implying that he's in charge of the world?
Yes, but understand, number one, when you read Lucifer in the Old Testament, it's a Latin Bible. That comes later, and we'll go to that next panel. But also, in terms of the ruling the world, Isaiah mentions it, but in the New Testament, it is so evident that even Jesus didn't combat it. So that's when we know it's not just a statement. It is so clear that scholars of angelology turn to the New Testament as a specific point where whatever a prophet might have said in the past, because some prophecies are what are called ascriptions, they ascribe to something. It may not even be there yet, or they can prophesy something that might come in the future. But good question. Okay. In the next infographic, we're looking at four large periods after the Bible was written. So this is called the post-biblical period, the Church Fathers, the Middle Ages, Reformation, and Age of Science. And you'll see that in each one of them, I put some approximate dates. The Church Fathers is about the first 500 years after the time of Jesus. In the academic circles of history, we normally call it the patristic period. So let's go to that first. And that was the rise of Lucifer. Now, although Lucifer as a concept was evident in the Old Testament, but as a name, it only came about around this period where people began to translate into the Latin language called the Vulgate Bible. And the Latin language introduces the name Lucifer as a Latin alternative to the devil or Satan. The term morning star is also used in the Bible, in the Old Testament and New Testament respectively, and one of them refers to Satan, the other to Jesus. So that's very interesting. The church fathers, this is after the Jesus period, after the New Testament was written down, they began to interpret morning star exclusively only to Satan, and then also to add the term Lucifer, other books of the Bible that did not make it to our modern Bible. They began to refer to Satan as one who tempted Eve and was an enemy of Adam. Now, why was he an enemy? He was jealous of Adam. For some reason, this former angel who had fallen from grace and is now called Satan felt that God loved Adam more. And one reason was he felt that he was superior to Adam. Adam was made of clay, but he was made of fire and clay. So he felt that God had made a mistake by giving greater honor to Adam. And he determined from now on to spend the rest of his existence defying God by humiliating Adam. And one way to do that was to Eve, okay, to tempt Eve. God banished Satan from heaven and he fell to earth, where he was given legal title to mankind with the power to torment him. And Jesus came to redeem the legal title with the payment of his death. So in this period, the idea of Jesus coming to redeem humanity was based on a single concept, the legal concept of title. Humans belong to Satan. And because of that, only someone who is different from all other humans can redeem the title of human. So that's the idea of redemption. By the Middle Ages, for a 1,000-year period, from 500 to 1500 AD, it's a very long period, Satan became the punisher of the dead in hell and the lord of sorcerers. Satan and other fallen angels are considered pure spirits of great intellect. This was by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. And later, Satan became the enemy of God in humanity. He was also made the superintendent of hell, because during this 1,000 period, the idea of hell took on more interest, became studied by a lot of scholars. And of course, the writers, two of the writers that made the most impressive contribution to the way we think about this was Alighieri Dante from what we now call Tuscany in Italy, and John Milton, the blind poet in England. He went blind in later years. These two writers made major contributions because their writings were influenced by the Bible itself and their thinking about it, but they in turn influenced a lot of painters in the age of the Renaissance period as well. By the Reformation in the 16th century, and when you say Reformation, you normally think of two persons. You think of Martin Luther in Germany, and you think of Jean Calvin or John Calvin of Geneva. He was a Frenchman, but France didn't exist as modern France at the time. Well, he was mayor of Geneva. And these two made major contributions to shift again the idea of the devil's role. And the motif of the devil made me do it became very important at this time. And in some ways, we have inherited that concept where people will say for legal defenses, the devil made me do it, I didn't plan to do it. Satan became the ever-present tempter. So he's everywhere all the time. At this stage, Satan is no longer limited to where he is. You'll find in the book of Job, God asked Satan, where were you? And Satan said, I was going up and down. At this point, the understanding was Satan doesn't need to go up and down. He is omnipresent. Satan has the power of diabolical possession over humans. So this would be demon possession. Now, some of you who may have either experienced it or you have witnessed it, or like me, you have been surrounded by people who claim to have witnessed it. I grew up in Malaysia, and in the 60s, there were a lot of attributions to demonic possession. And that was something that I grew up with and I heard a lot about it. Also apparent in the Philippines and Indonesia and many parts of Southeast Asia. Satan enslaved while Christ redeemed humankind. So this became the major motif in that 1,000-year period. This 1,000-year period was also the time when the Bible became the first of the major printed books in Europe, with Johann Gutenberg's printing press in the 15th century. So now we come to the age of science from the 17th century onwards. When we say science, in Latin, scientia simply means knowledge. But when we say science here, we mean modern science. We mean experimental science. We mean the science that eventually, from the 17th to the 19th century, emerged as three very specific areas of science we inherit today: physics, chemistry, and biology. And by the early 20th century, a fourth area of both science and arts came about. It's called archaeology. So modern science and archaeology recovered geohistorical context of the biblical and post-biblical statements regarding angels, demons, Satan or devil or Lucifer or Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles is an interesting character. It's a German term and is derived from Hebrew, but it first came out in Marlowe's book on Dr. Faustus, and later Goethe wrote about Faustus and how Dr. Faust made an arrangement with the devil, to make a deal with the devil. Knowing what we know now from science and archaeology, why do we still have this persistent idea of what is known as the post-biblical ideas of Satan that's not even in the Bible? Why do we have it from Church Fathers, the Middle Ages, and the Reformation? And one reason is the persistence of original sin doctrine. It is still believed in many denominations that humans were born with original sin, even though that concept didn't exist in the Bible. It developed much later with Augustine in the 5th century. As long as you have the original sin doctrine, you now want to have a post-biblical interpretation of Satan to accommodate that, because the original biblical idea of Satan is not evil enough to do justice to the doctrine of original sin. So now we can say today we have new scientific discoveries and spiritual insights to continue to provide a deeper understanding of God. And part of our work here at the Academy for Christian Thought is to maintain a faith in God, an understanding of the Bible, and to know the difference between biblical and post-biblical teaching so that we can put it in its context, so that when Christians ask the question, should I believe in the Bible? Should I believe in angels? Should I believe in demons? The real answer is, until you know this development, you don't really know what you're referring to when you say angels and demons. So when someone says, Ron, do you believe in angels? I would ask, do you mean the angels were mentioned in the Bible? Or do you mean the angels and Satan mentioned in the Reformation period, Middle Ages, or among the church fathers? Now I'm going to close with a statement at the bottom. The modern Christian idea of Satan is not the biblical Satan. The Bible's message is embedded in the media use. So in any religious text, including anything I write, everything I write today, I have to use the vocabulary of the 21st century with the media used, whether it's books or videos or blogs. So whatever I use, future readers or people who want to understand my mind will have to bear that in mind, the limitations of the media use. The Bible has been retold, rewritten, and reinterpreted for new geohistories, which means geography and history, for time and space, for new demographics, new kinds of people. When we say new kinds of people, we mean people in the past, most of them could not read or write, so that the way knowledge was conveyed to them were through paintings and sometimes through stained glass windows and etchings and drawings, sometimes even dances, believe it or not. Dances were designed to symbolize words, and in response to new knowledge. So new knowledge has always changed the way the Bible was retold, rewritten, and reinterpreted. Okay, I hope this helps you get a framework of what we're looking at for the history part of the story of Satan. We're now ready for any questions you might have.
Okay, there are some comments in the chat panel, and I'm just going to read them out. So Doris mentioned, was Satan assigned to rule the world of earth before he fell?
Yes, he was, in a sense, at least as far as he was given a mandate to be in charge. The idea of ruling is a very loose concept, because there's ruling meaning I can do anything I want. So I don't think that's the kind of ruling he had. That's management, meaning I'm there to make sure things work out. And if it doesn't work out, I can report to my leader, in this case, God, and God will say what you can do. Now, it's not part of our lecture here, but in angelology, there are actually 9 orders of angels. The highest order is the seraphims, the second order is the cherubim, and then you have various other orders coming down. And believe it or not, angels are the lowest order. The second lowest order are the archangels, the seven you mentioned. And above them all, there are others as well, the minions, the virtues, and all that. Who are all these classes and orders of angels? They're all supposed to manage the planet Earth. They are supposed to manage the boundaries of heaven and hell. They will move around to make sure that there's no transition, there's no escape from one to the other. So if you ask the question, was the devil given power over humans? He's always been given managerial power from the very beginning. But by the time of Jesus' time, he was given even more in the sense that he could now use it to tempt Jesus.
Harley has her hand up. Harley, are you able to unmute to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. This is such a brief but fascinating lecture. How can we keep learning about this, or do you have any book recommendations or upcoming classes on this topic?
I'll be frank with you. I hesitate to give you any book recommendations because many of them are so badly written because they were written so long ago. And most of them, like the one I have was 1967, for example, right? It's not a very popular topic at all. Well, it's very interesting, but it's not popular. They are very different things. Not popular because it's a real pain to write a book like this. It's so broad. Number two, there's no real market for this. But since I'm used to writing books with no market, I plan to write one myself by the end of this year. But look how get into our mailing list. And this whole thing, along with two other major sections, the philosophical imperatives and the scientific implications of what it means to have Satan and all that, will be done through Udemy. It's another program with a 10-hour free seminar. And we'll mention that in the newsletters coming up as we do this. So,
Great, thank you so much.
yeah, but if you just want to find out about the internet are full of information about angels, be very mindful that when it's not part of a published book, there's not that much responsibility to be accurate.
Okay, I'm just
My
taking.
ministry is concerned about accuracy as much as we can. So that's why I wouldn't feel in good conscience I can say, go here and check Wikipedia and check this and that, okay?
It is 1:33, and this is meant to be a 30-minute session. I'll take one more question from the chat, and then we'll have to wrap this up. I know it's really interesting. So Doris actually had another question. Isn't original sin an interpretation of the enslavement of man before he was redeemed?
Say that again. The question
Isn't original sin an interpretation of the enslavement of man before he was redeemed?
Not entirely. Original sin as a concept only emerged in the 5th century AD, and that was largely attributed to Augustine, and he had a different goal. Now, we covered all of that in the book. I don't have it in front of me, but that's a book that Simon showed. I just finished writing the book, and it's on the world's oldest Bible, on the Dead Sea Scroll. If you have the book, you'll find, I think, chapter 4, chapter 5, I went through the entire evolution of the doctrine of sin. Oh, there we go. That's
Simon showing the book.
Yeah. That's a full color book, by the way, and it's a big book. It's a letter size, so don't be fooled by that. That book will tell you the history of the oldest Bible and why the doctrine of original sin was so dominant even today, even though we now know it was an invented concept. It's not even regarded as something serious in a major part of the church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. There are 18 Eastern Orthodox churches, the Russian, the Greek, most of Eastern Europe. They do not regard it as part of biblical teaching because it wasn't, but it became part of the teaching of the church fathers, what we call post-biblical period. Okay.
Okay.
Well, great. Well, thanks for joining us for this very, very brief lecture.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Choong, for the enlightening session on angels and demons. Sounds to me, anyway, that Satan is not that scary after all. I'll be able to sleep tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope that you found today's session to be informational. The full session on angels and demons will be available for registration later in the year. As I mentioned earlier, you can find a recording of today's lecture on our social media channels and on our website at actministry.org. Goodbye and have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
One more thing to mention, join us, I think July the 10th,
Oh,
for a lecture on magic and miracles. Okay. That's the third of the three. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.